All right. I want to go back to I'll go back to the online editor just to kind of show you really quickly. And let's talk about the concept of arguments. Okay. Now you guys hopefully at this point know how to use the circle function. So if I were to do something like this, let's break this down a little bit. What am I telling it to do? Well, there's a circle function that builds a circle, and it needs information. It needs an x value, it needs a y value, and it needs a diameter. And we would call all of these arguments. Okay. And the idea is that your function can use that information. And part of the beauty of an argument is by having different arguments, you get different results. So here I have a circle here, but if I were to do the circle function again, but give it different arguments, like instead of having 100 for my x value, let's do 200. And I hit return or play. Now I get another one, right? So I ran the same function twice, right? But I gave it different data or different arguments, and the result is I got a different result. And that's kind of, the beauty and the power of arguments is to be able to run a function, but sort of customize it. Okay. So let's talk about how we can do that. All right. I built a function myself. It's called build circle. Okay. This is not part of the normal P5 library. What this does is it will use the circle function. And I have these two values. This is the y value and the diameter, and those are going to stay static. They're always going to be the same. But what I want to do is I want to change the x value. Every time I run this function, I want to put the circle at a different horizontal or x value. Okay. So in my parentheses, remember we were building parentheses, we are going to add what is called a parameter. Okay. Not positive, but position. There we go. This is referred to in programming as a parameter. A parameter is information that the function needs. Okay. So in other words, when we call the build circle function, we have to give it information that will substitute or be used in this parameter. Okay, so how does this work? Well, basically, it's a giant game of variable substitution. I'm going to come here and I'm just going to write build circle, and I'm going to put 100. Okay. So let's talk about what's happening. Build circle is a function that I created. It's not part of the P5 library. Okay, so my browser is going to be like, okay, there's a function called build circle. So we try to find build circle. Okay. Build circle is like, hey, by the way, I need a value. I need a number, an x position. Okay. So when you call the function, when you call functions, you might remember we always use parentheses, right? And then now when you call it in the actual code, this is referred to as a argument, right? What happens is that value, in this case 100, that's going to get placed here. So then essentially what happens is now position X is equal to 100. And then that value will get substituted anywhere within this block of code that value is used, or that variable is used. Okay. So it starts here, position X now becomes this value, and then anywhere in this block, anytime we call position X or whatever the name of the variable is, that value of 100 is going to be used. Okay. So let's see how that looks. If I come in here, This is 200 in terms of the height, 25, I think, in terms of the diameter, and it should be at 100. And since we know how the x value works, that seems about right. I'm going to come in here and let's do that again. Let's run that same function. This time I'm going to put, I don't know, 250. All right. So what's going to happen? Well, we're running this function. This is my argument. Okay. That value will get placed here. Now, so position X was 100 from the first one, but now position X is going to be basically is now going to be 250. And so that is going to be the new value of this. And that value is going to be placed here. And any place in that code block, it should be used. So the result is the first time my circle should be placed in an X or a horizontal value of 100. And then the second time it should be 250. Let's see if we're right. Save. Hey, there you go. Okay. And so basically I could just keep doing this. I could do, okay, build circle, I don't know, 350 or whatever number floats my boat. Boom. Okay. So you can see how this could work. Let's say I made a mistake. Let's say I didn't put an argument. Okay, I did this. And by the way, not every function needs arguments, not every function has parameters built in them. Some do, some don't. It depends on how they were built. But let's say in this case, I do have a parameter, but when we call the function, we didn't give it an argument. So what happens here is if you pass this to here, but there's no value, the build circle function's like, hey man, you were supposed to give me a number. That number is going to become position X. And the computer's like, I don't have any number. We weren't given any number. So then all I can give you is null. Null means like it's not a number. Okay. It's technically nothing. It's not a zero. It's just like nothing. Okay. And so what happens is now this, position X is now equal to null. And null is not a number. Null is nothing. I mean, it's basically not, I don't even know. I may not even be explaining it 100% correctly. I'm not a mathematician, but null basically is like, there's nothing. It's not a number. It's not a word. It's not anything. The problem is this is still going to get substituted in there, but how do you place a circle at an X position or a horizontal value of null? You can't. So what's going to happen is this is going to cause problems, okay? And if I go back and I refresh, notice how no circle is coming. And if we look at this, it's going to say, P5 says circle was expecting number, meaning like that was the value it was expecting for parameter 0. Parameter 0 is the first parameter because you can technically have multiple parameters. If there were multiple parameters, it'd be parameter 1, parameter 2, so on and so on, but received an empty variable instead. If not intentional, this is often a problem within scope, okay? So you can see this causes problems and my circle doesn't run. So fix that, if your function that you build has a parameter, when you call it, you must give it an argument and give it the correct argument, by the way. So I could give it an argument that is technically an argument, but once again, it's not going to work. So for instance, let's say I gave it a string of yellow, okay? Well, that means now position X is equal to yellow, which is cool and all, except that means that when we call it here, this is now yellow, right? Because it's variable substitution. So how do you, how do you place something at the horizontal position of yellow? I don't know. That you can't do that. So once again, it's like, technically we gave it an argument, except we gave it the wrong type of value. You know what I mean? And so if we go back and we refresh this, it's going to give us, see what it says, was expecting number for parameter 0, received string instead. Okay, so what that means is it was expecting a number, but it got something that wasn't a number. So if I redid this with like a Boolean, like true or false, that would also cause the same problem. So just make sure that when you call your function and you give it a argument, it's the correct type of argument. Okay. So I'm going to put in, 100. Okay. All right. Let's do this. I'm going to build a function from scratch. Okay. And I'm going to call it function build square. Okay. And what I'm going to do is when someone runs this function, it's going to use the square function, and I'm going to position. So I want to have an x value. I'm just going to call it pos x for position. And this is going to be the y value. This is going to be the diameter of the square. So when I'm building my function, I'm saying, okay, when someone calls this function, I need a value. In this case, the value is going to be a number, like 12 or something. And I'm calling that pos x, okay? When someone gives that to me, that will get substituted into anywhere that's being used in my project, okay? So I'm going to come in here, build square. So I'm going to run this. Well, okay, first, let's do this. Nothing is going to happen. Why? Well, I have a function, except I never called it. It has to be called somewhere here, and it hasn't been. So that's part of it. The second thing is, all right, let's say I run the function I've just created, build square like this. Here's what's going to happen. Let's do a little Blackboard code. Okay. This creates the canvas. This makes it gray. My console is going to go like, oh, okay, this is not part of the P5 library. So I'm going to look through the code. Looks through the code, finds the function, right? Oh, okay. It's gonna, when this is called, the computer is gonna be like, hey man, you're supposed to give me a number. That number is gonna be is the pos x number. Except when we called this, there's no argument, right? It's blank. So once again, when that happens, all the computer can do is go to like, all right, well, let's just make it null. Okay. So now pos x, that's not supposed to be a capital, but whatever, is now null. And most of the time you don't want null. I mean, there are times you could use it, but for now we don't want it. Null is bad. We don't, so how do you place an object at an x value of null? You can't. It's not going to work. So what that means is we're going to have an error here. Okay. It's not going to be kosher. It's not a good day. So if I run this and do an inspect console, even though it has a little flower here. I think that's new. I don't remember the flower before, but anyway, P5 says square was expecting number for parameter 0, received empty variable instead. Okay, so not good. That's not what we want. Let's say I did this. I'm giving it a value of false. Okay, that's a Boolean, right? So what that means is we've said, okay, well, it's going to run this function. Pos x is now going to be equal to false. So then here becomes false because, variable substitution and all that fun stuff. So how do we place something at the x value of false? You can't. That doesn't make any logical sense. So once again, that's going to be a problem, even though I did give it an argument. So square was expecting number for parameter 0, received Boolean instead. Okay, not good. We don't want that. So let's try it. Let's give it an actual number like 100. There you go. By the way, you might have noticed that it actually started here. So why did that work? So without getting like overly complicated, technically Booleans equal. So like to a computer, a Boolean of false is 0 and a Boolean of true is 1. So even though normally, like if this had been for a string variable here, this wouldn't have worked. But because technically it was expecting a number, in I know false, technically Boolean is not correct, but what happened is the computer went, oh, a Boolean is really 0, so that's why it placed it like right at the beginning. I bet you if I did this, it would actually place it at 1. I wasn't trying to do this, but I kind of forgot that Booleans are technically numbers. Yeah, see, I went to like 1 there. Anyway, this only worked because it was expecting a number, and Booleans technically translate to numbers. If it was expecting a string, this wouldn't have worked. Anyway, and then that only works for literally 1 and 0. And I want something above 1 or 0. So I'm going to go to 100. Okay, there you go. Let's run the function again. Build square. 200. Hey, there you go. All right, so that's my function is working, right? I'm calling it, I'm giving it an argument. Let's just say for the sake of argument, I'm just going to get rid of this second one for now. Let's just say instead of saying the x value, I want to put the x and y value when we call it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit my function a little bit. And I'm going to say, okay, I want an x value and I want a y value. Okay. And then I'm going to say, okay, x is equal to 200, y is equal to so I have an x value, a y value that's substituted as an x value and a y value. Okay. So before we run this, let's do a little Blackboard code here. Okay. We're running this function. It's running this function. I'm giving it an argument of 100, right? So this is the first argument. So that's going to substitute into the first parameter. Okay. And then that's going to get substituted here. The problem that's going to happen here is we're actually asking for 2 numbers. So the program is like, hey, man, you're supposed to give me 2 numbers, an x value and a y value. And the function's like, oh, dude, I only got 1 number. They only gave me 1 number. So then what's happening is the function we build is like, all right, we'll take the first parameter, the first argument's going to become parameter, the first parameter. Technically, that's considered parameter 0. And then we don't have any other values, so we're going to call this null. We get that old favorite that we hate, null. Okay. And so once again, we're getting this problem of like, all right, that's not, that's going to substitute null in here. And once again, how do you put something on the vertical or the y position of null? You can't. Okay. And so that's going to cause a problem. So if I save and I go back, null was expecting a number for parameter 1. Why is it parameter 0 and 1? We'll talk about that later with arrays. Don't worry about that right now. A lot of things are always like, we'll talk about this later. But for now, just trust me on this, okay? It's just what they are. So how do I fix this problem? Well, we have to give it the right number of arguments. So the way it works is that when calling a function, your arguments must match the number of parameters. Okay. So in other words, if there's 2 parameters, I must have 2 arguments. So I need to give it 2 values. This is going to be the pos x value. This is going to be the pos y value. Save, run. There's my function, or there's my square. I run the function again, build square. I don't know, 200, 350. Okay. By the way, you can have different parameters. They don't all have to be the same type. So here there were always numbers, right? Let's just say for the sake of argument, we're also going to pass a color. I'm going to call it square color. Okay. And I'm just going to use the fill function that we know how to use. And I'm going to say whatever color is passed, that's going to become the color. So this needs to be a string, or technically you use numbers too, but we're going to use strings. So right now, what would happen is I don't have the same number of arguments as parameters. That's going to cause some trouble. Okay. So color was expecting at least one argument. What we're going to do is come in here, and now I'm going to add in yellow and I don't know, hot pink, a hot pink kind of day. Save, run. Let's run this bad boy. All right, yellow, hot pink. So you can have as many parameters as you want. All right. So run, practice with these two, create your own functions, make them have parameters, call them, and just make sure that the number, when you're passing arguments from your code, that you have the right number of parameters and that you're giving it the right type of values. If it's expecting a number, you give it a number. If it's expecting a string, you give it a string. If it's expecting a Boolean, you give it a Boolean. Okay.